Yvonne, Farrell, and Shelley McNamara. Are you there? Here they are. Evviva McNamara and Evviva Farrell. We have come to the 16th edition of the International Architecture Exhibition. In the history of La Biennale, architecture somehow got into the section of the arts as a subsection at the beginning. We can still remember the famous exhibition by Paolo Portoghesi. It was part of an art exhibition in 1980. And then the architecture section was created. And then we had two international exhibitions that used to last for 1 month. Whole Lines exhibition took a limited space in the spaces of the Biennale. They got to 57,000 visitors as a maximum. Some of these exhibitions became famous in our history, the exhibition by Aldo Rossi in particular. They were exhibitions by architects for architects. The dialogue, the debate that originated from those exhibitions was limited to the discipline of architecture as such. Starting from our restructuring, our reform, year after year, we have invested a lot in the architecture exhibition. It is perhaps the sector we have invested more on to reach, we hope one day, the same size as the art exhibition, the same role as the art exhibition, to transform it in the most significant event in the world of architecture. But as this is not enough for us, we have also prolonged the duration of the exhibition to 6 months, which is a crazy decision. There is no architecture exhibition in the world that lasts 6 months. But we have done this not only because we wanted to imitate the importance of the art exhibition, but also because we have tried to give to architecture, to the architecture exhibition, a different destiny. That is to say, to transform it into a place to meet people, not just a world of architecture. Architecture completes our sections: art, dance, theater, music, cinema, and it is perhaps the most political among the different arts. Its political role is apparent, I think. With architecture, we influence our private life and our social life as well. Architecture is a tool to organize our life and the civil society as a whole. Talking to the public means recognizing, acknowledging that the public, ourselves, must ask something of architecture. We are the first engines for architecture. Normally, architecture used to be pushed forward by great public institutions, but as early as last century, architecture needed citizens in order to express requests that were suited to the times. In the past, a few institutions were sufficient to widen the space for an historic center. Nowadays, this is not enough any longer. If the civil society does not recognize that architecture is a tool for self-government, we must say that the civil society will be poorer in tools and in results. Architecture is a source for public goods. And here we come closer to the theme of this exhibition. What we create with architecture for a private use becomes part of the public space structure. Architecture is two-sided. It is the essence. This is the very essence of architecture. And therefore architecture is a tool for us to satisfy private needs, but at the same time it is a tool to characterize better each human being as a citizen. Through architecture, we create public goods. Allow me to say that my training as an economist prevails in me, and public goods are those goods that cannot be exchanged, owned, or traded on the market. Public goods can be obtained in two ways: through a public will, public institutions, public structures governing the action and the interests of the private sector by guiding them. Second way, public goods can be a gift, not an economic exchange, not the object of trading. Architecture has an extraordinary potential for the generosity of the individuals. Besides being a commitment to be aware of one's being part of a civil society that has to have the tools to govern the evolution of the vital space, of the operating space. The second side of this coin is that there is the possibility of individual generosity. These two themes were somehow discussed and faced by Biennale. They can be considered the two reference points for our architecture exhibitions. Scilla and Carridi, we can say, of our discussion. How can architecture benefit the public society? Through public actions or private gifts. Our two curators in this architecture exhibition insist on this concept. The features of their project that can offer incredible opportunities, because the gift we make in space where we insert a building can be extremely important. This city is clearly a great example of how the most evil Venetian merchant, when building for himself, knew he was also building for the whole of the city. And also selfishness in the end resulted in a public gift to the city as such. Therefore, the gift is not necessarily the result of a general benevolence or individual generosity. It might also be the result of a desire for self-representation, and it can be of a different nature. All of this, as I was saying, has been discussed and analyzed in the different architecture exhibitions, in the different biennales over many years. Biennale has as its initial intuition the fact that these exhibitions are not trying to be exhaustive, involving different types of energies. They must not be considered anything else than a ring in a chain of evolution, focusing in the different years to different aspects of a theme, taking up one point of view or another. And the more a biennial is, the more a biennale is partial, the better. We then have to develop in our history a pluralist point of view, to diversify our point of view, to contribute to the discussion on the different themes, both with experts and visitors alike. Creating free space can be considered both a public action and a typical element of an individual project. As we turn to the public, as we speak to the public, this is the objective of both the art exhibition and the architecture exhibition, that both last for 6 months. This exhibition increasingly turns into a place for meetings, and as such, we try to enrich it with a number of chances to create dialogue. During the exhibition, we will have meetings, weekly meetings on architecture, where the public can meet architects exhibiting their work in the exhibition, explaining their practice, explaining how they got to a certain decision. We always gather lots of people. If our visitors see an architect realizing something, they feel satisfaction. It is like witnessing a natural phenomenon, like the birth of something natural. And these meetings turn out to be extremely precious because they give us the feeling of what is the elementary lesson we should learn during an architecture exhibition. But things can be done in a different way. You must not necessarily be a traditional, to use a traditional approach. You can change things. Seeing an architect designing time and space is what an architecture exhibition should send as a main message to the civil society. And as a civil society, we are asked to devote our time to think before acting. We have to devote our time to analyze what we are doing without accepting what is sold to us as inevitable, but rather avoiding conformity and a passive approach to our society. We have the architecture weekends, and then we have 65 foreign pavilions. The number of the pavilions has increased dramatically over the years. Allow me to remember that while we do not advertise our activities, we do not have an advertising campaign for the different countries, unlike the expo events that look for participants for their event, unlike art fairs that involve the market. They invite countries to take part in the event. In these years, as it was before, I have never called anybody to invite a country to take part in the Biennale. Countries are invited to be part of the Biennale only after they have expressed their desire to participate in the Biennale. And we want to stress this difference between a general exhibition and a place instead, where those who participate really want to be part of the dialogue this event can develop and can originate. The exhibition in pavilions was harshly criticized in the field of art, but the pavilions of the different countries, when the cosmopolitan approach dominated the scene, an approach that has been revised recently, but that used to be the absolute truth in the past, we have always kept our decision to maintain a pavilion, an exhibition based on pavilions, but also to accompany it with a single exhibition, Unitarian exhibition, based on two pillars: our exhibition with the curators, with our curators, and the exhibitions by the participant countries. What do we expect of them? We do not expect local products. We do not expect these pavilions to represent the country. We want these pavilions, these national pavilions, as besides our curators, we have 56 curators of the participant countries. We want these countries to provide us with new ideas, new possibilities, new sources of discussion. Yesterday we had 4 hours devoted to the presentation of the different projects by the different participating countries, and this is the spirit that should guide these countries with their curators that are chosen with competition, public competitions. And they provide us with new ideas referring to that country, but not necessarily so, because in many cases they face general problems. And this is certainly something that enriches, makes the Biennale richer, not only in terms of origins or identities. This makes our dialogue more fruitful with a larger and larger number of participants. Within the framework of the evolution of the Biennale, this is an extraordinary result, we think, because the pavilions have increased in number, but they have increased because of their desire to be part of the Biennale. This year we have some new countries who have decided to be part of the Biennale: Antigua and Barbuda, Saudi Arabia, Guatemala, the Lebanon, Mongolia, Pakistan, and the Holy See. The Vatican already took part in 2 art exhibitions, but this is the first time they also participate in the architecture exhibition with a project that will be placed in the wood in San Giorgio Island. We will have a special project for Forte Marghera, which describes our idea of inclusion. We have a special project for applied arts that we develop in collaboration with the Victorian and Albert Museum, and that will focus on an intervention in the public housing in London, Robin Hood Gardens, something that was extremely important at its time. There are many participants for the Biennale sessions with many faculties of architecture from all over the world. They can organize a 3-day visit, and we provide assistance to them and a room where they can meet. These visits are structured visits, so they can provide credits for many of these faculties. We have more than 100 of these faculties from all over the world, They come from the United States, from China, from many countries. They provide further ideas and further sources of thought. They turn the Biennale into something more to be added to their activities, normal activities within the university study. But before passing the floor to our curators, in your press folder, you will find the dates of the different meetings on architecture. You will find the list of the architects exhibiting. I postpone my thanks to the sponsors and to the donors, and thanking you for being here despite the bad weather. I stop here for the time being and pass the floor to our two ladies in Dublin from a city under siege will tell us about their exhibition. They will tell us the guidelines and the principles that have guided their exhibition. Thank you, and see you later.
Good morning, everybody. We feel very deprived sitting here alone. Actually, now I can see President Baratta, which is very reassuring. While you were making your presentation, I could only see Yvonne. So it's a surreal experience for us to be here alone in our houses, trapped by this amazing storm, and not to be with you in Venice. So we're very sad about that. But yesterday in our office, we had to make a very quick decision because we couldn't get to Venice, that we would make a presentation for you. So what you'll be seeing is not live, but Yvonne and I are live here with you. And what we tried to do was to map what we've been doing over the last number of months. And listening to President Baratta speak, in a way, there's many of the things that he has said remind us of the conversations that we have had over this time, which have been very rich conversations with President Baratta and with his team. And we're always really interested and encouraged and channeled by the terms that President Baratta uses. And we have a summary of his text here, and we immediately picked out certain things which are so relevant to our FREESPACE manifesto, where he talks about architecture being the most political of all the arts, and that architecture can be a gesture against dependence and conformism, and that the goal of the Biennale is to promote or to grow the desire for architecture. And these conversations we have found really rich and really useful in the development of our proposals for the exhibition. Yvonne and I realized yesterday, having made the presentation in the office, that we made a presumption which maybe we should not have made, which was that you would all already be familiar with our manifesto, which we presented last May. So there's just a couple of words that we would like to add before you see the presentation, just to remind you of what our ambition is. And when the President already spoke about free space and certain interpretations of free space, what we were interested in right through the detailed work that we've been doing is trying to elaborate on this proposition of what is free space. And at the time we presented it, we talked about it being to do with generosity of spirit, and that a sense of humanity is at the core of architecture's agenda. And that as architects, that our role is to make spatial gifts to all those who use architecture and also perhaps those who can't use it. And that the materials of architecture, you could say, are nature's free gifts of light and sunlight and moonlight, and that somehow we go back and somehow remember the very basis of architecture, as well as trying to map the future of architecture. That we, I suppose, try to remind ourselves and to look for, but this is what we've been searching for in terms of finding participants who would develop this theme, is what kind of work has this sort of generosity that can, irrespective of program or budget or restrictions, somehow find some space, some gesture, which would be a free gift to the citizen or the person passing by. And we're also very interested in the idea of time and memory, and the sense of promoting the continuity of architecture as a tradition, that it's not in the hands of the individual genius, let's say, but that we're part of a bigger culture and part of a bigger world, and that we see architecture as weaving its way between the archaic and the contemporary and the future. And these were just a couple of the things that we didn't mention, which we tried to describe in the presentation to follow. And we will, of course, be here for answers. And Yvonne, you want to say something?
I would like to thank the President for his introductory words. I would like to thank the technicians who have connected us from Dublin to Venice. And as Shelley said, we are really very sad that we are not actually in Venice today with you. Nor were we there yesterday to hear the various peoples from around the world present in terms of the other participants. But it does reinforce, I suppose, the nature of place, that we're on this earth and we think we're completely independent of nature. And here, Shelley and I are anchored in our own city because of the winds from Siberia and a storm from the Bay of Biscay. So it is interesting that nature herself decides on how we can actually live our lives. So that's one issue. So apologies that we're not with you. We would sincerely like to thank the President for approaching us to, first of all, take on this great honor of being curators of the Biennale. I mean, the Biennale is an incredible part of the architectural world, and both Shelley and I are truly honored to be asked to take on this task of representing the architectural culture and, if you like, choosing from within the community of architects to present their understanding of our manifesto. And what is very interesting about the theme of free space, we hope that in the future that the word free space becomes something that within the community of architects, but also for the so-called person in the street, that the word free space is an ingredient that people look for within our discipline, that each architect is responsible for this gift to the general public or to mankind, that we are a commissioned discipline, a commissioned art form, and that the free space ingredient within each project is the invention or the space or the uniqueness that the intelligence and skill of architects find and give back to humanity. And we are also interested, I suppose, in the translations. We'll talk about it in the video that we've prepared for you, that in different languages, it's just interesting how we think and how we make space is a global phenomenon, and also the fact that building now, the percentage of built form on the earth, that our profession is more responsible than ever in making the world that we live in. And we are struck in all the conversations we've had with the President, where he really is a guardian of the intense possibility of architecture to deal with beauty. And there was a documentary on the beginnings of civilization, and seemingly at about 25,000 BC, they believe is the dawn of the idea of beauty. And I think that what is a great honor for us is to be working with people like the president and the Biennale team, who are really custodians of this idea. How can our profession make the world more connected and more beautiful and more meaningful? So it is a pleasure for us to be involved in discussing architecture at this scale, and we truly hope that the choices that we have made are representative of this wonderful and complex discipline. So thank you.
Era la prova che
that was just the proof that the Dublin Ordinance has been respected, because each of the curators is speaking from their own home and not from the office. And now we will listen to the recorded presentation by Farrell and McNamara.
Good morning, everybody. We're sorry we can't be with you in Venice. Dublin is covered in snow, and we're on red alert here with a combination of blizzards and snow, and this is very unusual for us. It would take quite a lot to keep us away from Venice. We've prepared a presentation which we hope you will enjoy, which is an elaboration of our FREESPACE manifesto. And we made this presentation last May based on the FREESPACE manifesto. And we've put together some images which we hope will describe the journey that we've made since we've undertaken this wonderful and enormous challenge. What we have found is that our FREESPACE theme and the document that we prepared has actually worked as quite a robust tool to guide us in all the important decisions that we've had to make in terms of participants, in terms of the kinds of projects, in terms of the kind of work. So we have used this really as a way of navigating our way through the organisation of the exhibition. And we found that is interesting, that our first instinct, which was to set this theme of FREESPACE, is something that has worked throughout this whole stage of development of the Biennale.
And the next image which describes the entrance seat at Can Lys in Mallorca, which was built by Jorn Utzon in 1973, is an important image for us, because when Utzon thinks about a concrete seat and a tile seat at the entrance of this house, it is perfectly moulded to the human body for comfort and for pleasure, and spatially it is a word of greeting and of welcome. And as Shelley said, really in terms of the FREESPACE manifesto, we're really trying to find evidence and examples of the free space of generosity to human beings that architecture can contribute. The next image of the Palazzo Ducale in the fog is really important for us, because it describes the unique location of this wonderful city of Venice, but it also describes the earth as client, and that is an important aspect of our manifesto, because it brings with it long-lasting responsibilities. And the next image, which is the exterior of the Palazzo Ducale, is really architecture and the play of light and sun and shade and the moon and gravity and repeated structure. And this is the, if you like, the art of architecture, which is the structure of new building, of new form on the crust of the earth, which gives pleasure to the to citizens, to others.
The image where we have the Venetian light on the Palazzo Ducale is extraordinary for us because it was a morning in the palace where the reflective floor allowed the two qualities of light between sunlight and sky factor to be fractured and to be separated. And for us, this was a kind of miracle. I had never seen this before. And these are the miracles, if you like, of life itself, of nature.
What we found in our role as curators was that we really had to operate as architects. So what we tried to think about was the nature and the culture of the place in which the cordery and the central pavilion sit, and how we could somehow bring a sense of the city into the exhibition as well as bringing the exhibition to the city. So we really thought about this idea of context and place almost in the same way as when we go to a place to make a project. First of all, always the first question is how can we celebrate the very particular quality of the place, and how can this be revealed or made more present or more potent in the way that we occupy this place. And the image of Palazzo Fortuny, I suppose, is one of many of the spaces that we visited in our numerous trips to Venice. And what we found wonderful about Palazzo Fortuny was the very special atmosphere, which is mysterious. It's a place of work. It's a place where Fortuny and his partner were designers and makers and fabricators of wonderful set designs, of lamps, of lighting, of fabric. And we took this as well as a number of influences in terms of how we might think about how we would occupy, especially the cordery. And when we, I suppose, came to terms with the scale in the image of of Venice, coming to terms with the scale of the two venues that we were working with, the cordery and the central pavilion, and looking at them on the map, we really started to think about those spaces as pieces of Venice and tried to think about how we could somehow take the atmosphere of Venice into the cordery and also into the central pavilion. And then looking at the cordery itself and looking at the historic photographs and visiting the cordery when it was empty, which was a new experience for us and a fantastic experience to simply feel the space of this heroic building. We really started to think about how could we inhabit it in a way which would allow other visitors who may have never seen the full extent of the cordery before, how we could find a way of occupying it which somehow celebrated its scale and its sense of really being a unique piece of city in Venice, even though it's interior. When you look at it's an interior space, when you look at the scale of it in the context of Venice, it's quite a unique space. And we were thinking about it not being unlike the living bridges created during the Feast of the Redentore, where you get bridges full of people crossing the whole lagoon. So that was also a kind of reference as to how one might occupy a space of this scale in Venice. And then by contrast, the central pavilion is quite the opposite. It's built specifically for exhibition. It's a more labyrinthine, circuitous kind of space, the opposite to linear. And it's while the cordery has its light from the sides, windows facing north and south, we have in the central pavilion, we have no columns, we have volumes, interlocking and interweaving volumes with zenithal light, and it's like a lantern of light. And it was interesting because just simply looking at these buildings empty, helped us to curate the exhibition, to actually think, well, how could the buildings inform our choices? How could the buildings inform which projects we put in which building? How could the buildings inform maybe even different streams of work which would occupy, on the one hand, the corderie and on the other, the central pavilion? And also, how could we accentuate the difference between the two buildings? How could we really celebrate the difference? So these were the guiding lines for us, really, in our thinking as curators at the overall strategic level. And we're not going to show particular projects this morning, and we're not going to reveal the actual, let's say, curatorial strategy, because we really want to save this as a surprise, as something to be enjoyed when the doors open in May. But we do want to say that what we have found both a challenge and also a wonderful journey is trawling all over the world to investigate work that we never knew and making new discoveries of architects making wonderful work in parts of the world that we've never visited, and also exploring the work of colleagues whose work we already knew and trying to see what kind of work would somehow feed into the thesis or the philosophy of the manifesto. Because while we were looking for difference and variety, we were also looking for a way of bringing this kind of difference together in a way which would have some kind of cohesion. Because in the end of the day, while we have to think about the individual participants, we also have to think about what is the message, what is the flavour, what is the taste in the mouths that people will have when they leave this exhibition, what is the one or two things that they will take away as new discoveries. And that was very important in terms of the way that we made choices. And we have included participants from all around the world. We would like to say to those who have not been invited that there are many who are our respected colleagues. And we have to say that we chose samples that hopefully express architectural values which are shared with you who have not been invited and to which you have contributed, because we see architecture as a community. And in a sense it was quite difficult to make those final choices as to who's included, who's not included. But we really want to open this up and hopefully that there will be a feeling of generosity in the way that people view the Biennale, whether they are in the Biennale or not. We like this image of the rectangle full of names. So having made our final choice of the participants, we have 71 in total, as I say, from all over the world. And we have two special sections which elaborate on certain, let's call them sub-themes within our manifesto. The first one is entitled Close Encounter. And this really deals with the whole idea in architecture of delving into the past in order to understand how we might progress into the future. So we chose 16 architects whose work we felt should be in the show. Most of them no longer with us. And we chose 16 participants who would take this work and make an interpretation of it, which would somehow refresh or reinterpret the central importance, we think, of this work in the tradition of architecture. And this relates to our theme about continuity of tradition in architecture. It also relates to our theme of the archaic and the contemporary, that architecture has the capacity to bring the ancient and the new together, and that the past is real for us as operating architects and feeds into the future. We also took the practice of teaching as a sub-theme, because again, in relation to this idea of the continuity of tradition in architecture, so many of the participants in the exhibition teach, and many of them we have asked to, or a number of them we have asked, 13 participants, we have asked them to make some connection between their work as teachers and their work as practitioners. And again, the reason for this is within this idea of continuing certain traditions in architecture, that the teacher and the student is a very special relationship in terms of the world of architecture. And we have chosen teachers who practice. We are acutely aware of the teachers who deal with philosophy and theory and history, who are hugely important. But for us, what was interesting in this Biennale is that somehow we would make a connection between practitioners who build and make, and how that affects their teaching and their practice. I suppose it's also because it's such a rich environment for both the teacher and the student. It's a almost equal exchange where the teacher carries out research and the students challenge and renew the teacher's understanding of architecture by taking on new ideas and being challenged by new ideas. So we have, as we say, we have 2 special sections, and then we have 71 participants from all over the world. And this next image describes we really like this because it describes the fullness of the exhibition, that we have this rectangle full of names of all of these people who have invested huge energy and huge amounts of time and passion in responding to our invitations. And that's something that has been really enjoyable. In terms of this idea of layers of history and I suppose the idea that in architecture time is not linear, that time is more circuitous or is more a spiral. We've just taken a number of examples of buildings that we look to which somehow symbolize what we're trying to say, because we're not showing projects this morning. We want to reveal this on the opening day, the actual exhibits and proposals made by the participants. So the images we're showing are symbolic of the kinds of things that we're looking for. The image of the Duomo in Syracuse in Sicily is an extraordinary symbol for us, because it describes this whole thing of the capacity of architecture to absorb different layers in history, especially in Italy, the way this happens, and in Syracuse, the way that a Greek temple is subsumed by a Baroque cathedral, and still has amazing moments spatially and in terms of the collage of surface. Or in Albi, where we took some of our own students a number of years ago, this wonderful heroic brick building, the cathedral in Albi, which influenced Louis Kahn, who made beautiful drawings of this. And it was at the time we were doing a building in Toulouse, which we're still doing, it's under construction. But we loved this use of brick, where it somehow expressed both the weight and the heroic quality of brick, but also dematerialized brick, in that it feels like a blanket of terracotta folded over the interior space. Or in Le Tournai in France, which we recently visited, where it really is extraordinary in its sense of being a vessel of light and a vessel of sound. Extraordinary in the sense that it also seems to somehow be a place where the inner world can somehow be enriched. The inner world of the monks could somehow be enriched by the leanness and the primal quality of this building. Or our visits to Milan, which were hugely influential in terms of our understanding of of contemporary work which we hadn't previously known very well, such as the Santa Maria della Porta in Milan by Caccia di Mignoni. And we think the windows in this building are one of the most beautiful examples of window in the 20th century in terms of their sophistication and elegance. Or the landscape and housing at Ivry-sur-Seine by Renaudie and Galhustet, which is extraordinary in the sense of the way that landscape weaves its way through what feels almost like an infrastructure for living, and where diversity and difference is celebrated and integrated into the design of each apartment. And probably by contrast is the Galleria housing in Milan by Aimonino and Aldo Rossi, which we still find extraordinary. Even though it's many years ago since we first visited it, the 1970s. And recently visiting it again, we realise what an extraordinary place it is, and how it really is a microcosm of city, and it really represents what it was trying to do, which was to make a place of intensity which would be self-sustaining socially and urbanistically. And the scale, the heroic scale, and the kind of theatrical quality of the free space, of the circulation spaces in this complex of housing is absolutely extraordinary.
The image of our Bocconi project in Milan, we're using this and another project that we have done more as a sample about the discoveries and research that we ourselves have in our own work, trying to understand or reinforce the notion of free space. And the discovery for us in Milan was connecting to that city, but also, if you like, inventing a free space between the 1,000 offices which are suspended above the city and the carved ground into the city with the Biancalazza stone, reflecting the light deep in the city of Milan. And this is I suppose, central to our manifesto, is that the word free space is actually given meaning and a reality. That at one level it's a thought, what is the gift that architects give to citizens. And for us what's really important is this 8-metre high clear glass wall, which allows both the citizens of Milan to participate in the comings and goings of the University of Bocconi, but also the people and students and professors of Bocconi to relate out to the city. So it's about generosity of connection, and it's also about weaving into an existing fabric. The next image is one of our project for the UTEC University in Lima in Peru. And the important thing for us in relation to free space is that the discovery of Lima being a unique city, a desert city, but being affected by the von Humboldt current and having this unique climate, that for us the free space was really the protection of the vertical campus that protected against the high tropical sun, but also allowed the socialization or the socializing of the students and professors within a new vertical campus. So we use these just in terms of trying to give more and more meaning to the basis of the manifesto. What invention, what gift, what new understanding can we as a profession give to the citizens of the earth? And also going back to the earth as client, what's important for us in this section is that the natural convection of the breeze from the Pacific Ocean weaves its way through the section, being part of the daily life of the students and professors within this new university. The next image, which is this fantastic project by Lina Bobardi in São Paulo, it's just an incredible 80-metre span where the generosity of the architect and the understanding of structure allows the liberation of the space beneath this space within the city, and allows this image of people rising up like something out of a science fiction film where you move up from the public space into the body of the building. So this is an architect making, enclosing a space which was never there before, but by virtue of her invention and her talent and understanding that there's a gift to the city of São Paulo. The image, which we call the pleasure of trees, is really about a number of things. It's about the beauty of nature that is around us, the pleasure that one tree can give to a person, the changing seasons in terms of time. And it also refers to the last piece, which is the Greek proverb in our manifesto, where we say, "A society grows great when old men plant trees whose shade they know they shall never sit in." For us, this is really important because it's also about a commitment not only to the present, but also to the future and to future generations. And the pleasures of trees is a simple gesture of growth and time, but also in terms of sustainability and the nature of the material itself. That timber, wood, in our profession, we specify all across the world, we specify timber being used in our buildings. So it has a relationship to architecture by virtue of itself as wood or timber, but also in terms of the growth and time of trees. The image where we have Sverre Fenn's beautiful Nordic pavilion in the city where you are today in Venice, this extraordinary piece of architecture which you never tire of visiting. His relationship between ground and sky, his thin concrete beams that both hold and protect against the sun, the spatial strength and weaving of his absolute mastery of the art and discipline of architecture. So these are kind of evidences, pieces of evidence of architecture. And the last image which we want to discuss, I suppose, with you is in relation to the meaning of the word free space. And we're delighted with the global engagements of the participants and the participating countries in the process of its translation. When we were writing the manifesto, we wanted primarily to include the word space, but we also wanted a new use of everyday words, which would somehow cause us all to reframe an additional component that we use, if you like, in our profession to contribute to humanity. And we see architecture as the translation of need into space, and we're trying to find, if you like, the contribution of each project. Translation allows us all to map and rename intellectual as well as actual territory. And it's our hope that the word free space allows us all to burrow into the aspirations, ambitions, and generosity of architecture. Thank you. Well, we hope you're not being hit by the weather that we're experiencing here in Ireland. And we look forward to your reaction and hope that the Biennale, under the title of Free Space, contributes to the meaning and understanding of the complex and wonderful discipline of architecture. Thank you.